Budget phones have a purpose, two to be exact. They're here for people that don't want to spend much, but also for those people that don't need much. I am neither of those people, which is why this phone fails to impress me, even with its budget nature. That said, the Samsung Galaxy A53 5G came out at $450 US. Hello everyone, this is Matt from Real World Review, here with arguably one of the most talked about phones that no one wants to buy. And I think that's where I should start, separating myself from even the top YouTubers. Sure, it might have only been a handful of people, but there were actually some channels on here that recommended this phone, yet never tested it out, or at least never had video proof of them using this phone. Had those people actually used the phone, especially now, they wouldn't have recommended this phone. It's a strange one because on paper, it's actually a solid phone, and that's probably why they would recommend it. Following the Samsung A52, it still has the plastic mid-frame that even the A54 has. I bring it up because the A51 5G had a metal frame, just like the A55. Either way, we get the usual, nothing on the left side, microphone on the top, volume and power buttons on the right side, and the bottom packs the SIM tray slot, which does allow for an SD card, another microphone, and a loudspeaker that pairs with the top one to give us decent sound. Then of course we have the USB-C 2.0 port that allows for 25 watts of wired charging, meaning slow transfer speeds and decent charging speeds. The battery is 5,000 milliamps, so lots to charge, but performance is mediocre, honestly. But again, SD card slot, dual speakers, 5,000 milliamp battery, and 25 watts of wired charging sounds good, but in real life, it's not that great. The screen is also not that great. A 6.5-inch 1080p 120Hz OLED panel with Gorilla Glass 5 protecting it all sounds good, with the hole punch for the front camera and fingerprint scanner under that screen. But that 120Hz almost never happens, feeling like it sits at 30 to 90Hz all the time, and the fingerprint scanner isn't that reliable. Viewing content is good, not terrible like an LCD, but also not amazing like you would expect on an OLED panel. The screen's brightness is rated for 800 nits, but tests show that that is clearly just outdoor brightness, while indoor testing will give you a little over 400 nits. I would say that it's okay on my eyes, as it does feel a little bit dim. One last spec dump is the fact that it has 128 GB of UFS 2.1 storage and 6 GB of RAM to power the Samsung Exynos 1280 chip. When running benchmarks, this is on par with the Google Pixel 4's processor, which was released 3 years prior to this phone. And similar to the screen refreshing, this shows. The phone just chugs, not as terrible as the A14 5G, but still pretty bad and comparable processor-wise. The processor and camera performance is generally where Samsung cheaps out on these phones, with the A53 being no different. Honestly, the operations feel a little bit clunky, and the super mushy vibrating motor definitely does not help that. The back is plastic, so this phone kind of just feels like it's going to fall apart when you get a phone call. Like I said, all of this sounds good on paper, and the phone carries an IP67 rating and is decently light at 189 grams. This comes with the basics in terms of connectivity like Bluetooth 5.1, Wi-Fi 5, so no Wi-Fi 6, and 5G, with there being millimeter wave 5G versions of this phone out there. Just like the IP67 rating, the performance isn't meant to last. This is running Android 14 with hopes of Android 15, but honestly, I hope it doesn't. Or at least if it does, hopefully Samsung figures out a way to make this phone work decently. The Pixel 4 isn't a terrible operating phone, but somehow the A53 with its equally weak specs just runs slower. The cameras are questionable. I find that some shots actually look pretty good, but then there's this budget haze that's on some of them. Starting with the front camera, a 32 megapixel fixed focus sensor, even if it was 100 megapixels, it still wouldn't produce sharp shots. And the 12 megapixel bend down shots are probably a way more realistic way to use this phone. You get 4K 30 frames per second video, but overall the sensor is just okay and definitely not something I would be excited to use. Then the rear has two pointless cameras, a 5 megapixel macro and a 5 megapixel depth sensor, with the former looking worse than using the main camera. Then we have a 12 megapixel ultra-wide sensor, being the fourth camera on this phone, and it has no optical stabilization or focusability, which is to be expected. To be honest, it's actually not that bad, but not the best to complement the main sensor. But hey, at least we get 4K 30 frames per second available on this camera, which is not always the case on other phones. Lastly, we have a 64 megapixel main camera that is not only focusable, but actually optically stabilized. It generally shoots 16 megapixel shots, but the 64 megapixel option is there and not recommended. 4K 30 is still available on here and still isn't really wanted. Honestly, I'm trying here, but this does seem to be one of the highlights of the phone, especially when the A series phones aren't really camera focused. Something that you'll really notice on my A14 5G review. I know it sounds like I'm hyping up that phone, but I'm really going to be more negative than in this video. Regardless, I'll leave you with some photos and videos from the A53. Enjoy! See, not so bad, but when it is bad, it's miserable. Overall, it's passable for a camera set, even with the two pointless sensors on the back that try to make this phone look like an ultra model. Now, as much as people think I like to, I actually don't like bashing these phones. Like the Samsung A52, I was curious to use this phone, but I would be lying if I said that this phone is a perfect budget phone. In the used market, these phones can be found at under $100, and at that rate, it's a decent value. Especially if you're someone that breaks your phone or just wants a phone that's not complete trash. Again, under $100 isn't so much of a steal, it's just a good price. That $450 MSRP though, pretty bad. Phones like the Samsung S21 or S21 Plus cost a little bit more, but bring about a 40% faster processor based on benchmarks, making the step up in technical time travel to 2021 actually better. The real question would be how long these phones will still be supported software-wise, as Samsung points to 2026 being the last year of software updates for both the S21 series and the A53, with security patches seeming to end a year after 2026 Android, so possibly Android 16 or Android 17. That said, this phone is in a rough position. I assume it's not always been laggy, making apps like Instagram being a struggling mess like you see right now. I believe Android 14 is to blame, with One UI 6.0 and 6.1 definitely not helping. There is a time and a place for this phone, and I would say a very tight budget has to be the reason. That said, this phone should last a couple more years, but will it be enjoyable? One other huge factor is I fix phones for a living and nothing is worth fixing besides the battery and charging port, the latter that has a cable that will just fail for no reason. Okay, so the screen cost is $40 plus on Amazon, which is 100% guaranteed to be aftermarket trash, as refurbished ones cost me $70 plus, and that's wholesale. Then if the charging port isn't the issue with charging, the cable will go bad. Those are cheap to fix, but the connector to the board is this, which is used on the A52, A32, A12, A15, and so on. The connector is just trash, and drops will cause the pins to break from their solder, meaning that you'll either lose a screen or charging, and personally, I hate changing this connector out. Then on top of that, these boards will just fail, not showing anything even if the connector is replaced. This is common for the A52 and A53, which struggles in booting or boot looping becomes the symptoms before total failure. So either these parts are too much or not worth fixing, making this phone essentially disposable. Awesome to hear when you spend $450 brand new. There are little things like, sure, the always on display is cool and gives you little customization, but using things like eye comfort shields show off the lag and honestly makes it feel like this isn't actually cutting out the blue light. While not as terrible as something like the A14 5G, it feels like every action is like constantly waking up someone that keeps falling asleep. Also, the vibrating motor is miserable on this phone, and the plastic frame definitely does not help it feel better, like I said earlier. Honestly, that part might actually be a downgrade over the A51 5G. I don't remember that one actually feeling bad, but maybe it was. Another thing is I changed the screen. I slightly damaged the polarizer in the process, which is why this mark is here, but I replaced the frame as well. The issue is that the back is still the same, and it doesn't look good because it is a plastic back. I mean, we all know that plastic doesn't wear in a good way, but this isn't even scratched up that bad. Overall, I would say that this isn't a terrible phone. It is something that I've said 5 times and will reserve for my A14 5G review, but also is kind of like buying a new car. Don't spend $400+ on this phone, as you shouldn't for the A55 or whatever the latest A50 whatever series is, but $100 to $200, now we're actually getting to the right price. And that's my review of the Samsung A53 5G, a mid-range phone that turned into a budget one. But what do you think? I'm definitely not a budget phone user, and you obviously know this. But also, what is a good price to stay under when I review these phones? Like $100, $200, $300? Let me know, and as always, stay away from A-series phones, be a part of the 1%, and thanks for watching.